All right, here's my video demonstration, and then you can check on the screen up there. So watercolors. All I know is when I first learned how to do watercolors, I was probably a kid like you guys, right? So I was a little kid, and they'd give you watercolors like this, and little kids, what do they do when they have the watercolors? They take the water and they add it to the color like this, and then they start painting. And it's kind of light, so they figured, oh, I'll add some more color, and they do this. And then they keep painting, and then eventually the water starts running out and starts looking really bad like this. So let's see here. So you zoom in and it's starting to look kind of bad. And then you figure, okay, I'll just add more water. So you add more water and you continue like this. And it ends up looking like a mess because your watercolors are so inconsistent. Some areas are really dark, some areas are a little light. Then you got all these edges. And then the worst thing is the paper gets all shriveled up, okay? That's because usually in elementary school, they don't teach you anything. They just give you the watercolors and let you figure it out, which is terrible, okay? So really, the main thing is when we do watercolors, we don't use this kind of paper. We're gonna do a sample on this, but for your finished product, we use a paper that doesn't wrinkle up so quick. Second thing is this. This is the basis in watercolors. Very rarely do I mix up my watercolors. Do I take the watercolors straight from the tray, okay? What I normally do is this. So I'll have a glass over here where I'll get some water, okay? And then what I'll do is dip it into the watercolors. Let's just say I take some green here, okay? And you can see here's the green. I get that wet. And I'm gonna put that green into this tray, okay? Now I'm gonna just keep adding green to that tray. And I'll show you why. Now, I'm gonna take some more green and put some green in this tray. Now, when you look at this tray, these two colors don't look that different, but they are, okay? This green has a lot of water mixed in with it. So the watercolors become very transparent and very light. This color is more concentrated, okay? But the thing is, you don't know what it looks like until you actually try it. So every time you dip your brush in the water, what you're doing is adding more water. So the mistake that people make is a lot of times they use the watercolor, then they dip in the water, which adds more water to the watercolor. Then they dip in the water again, which adds more water. So they're constantly changing the consistency of their watercolors, okay? So what I do, if I'm gonna use this, I clean off my brush, then I get some paper towel and I dry it. So now I'm not adding more water to my watercolor. So now, if you take the watercolor here, there's my green, okay? Now I'm gonna clean my brush, dry it, and I'm gonna try this watercolor. There's a huge difference, okay? So what I always do before I use watercolors is I test the colors, okay? So what we have are strips that look like this. This is called a test strip, or it is a piece of watercolor paper that a student has used, and they're testing their colors out before they started it, okay? Let me show you a painting I did quite a few years ago. This is done in watercolors. Let me zoom out a little bit here. So this is done in watercolors, and except for the lettering I did on a computer and stuff. But this is all done in two colors, black and green, that's it, okay? So everything on here is a variation of black and green. And everything I did, look here, every one of these marks is a test. Before I decided, okay, this area right here I'm gonna do really, really light, okay, I would test the color down here. I wanted to get this green right here. I would test the color right here. So you're constantly testing colors. Either you do that on a separate strip, like this one, okay, or you just do it on part of your paper that's not gonna be seen. Later I'll probably trim this off, or I'll matte my picture so you can't see this area down here. Got that? So a couple things with watercolors. Number one, you're gonna be mixing your colors in a tray. So how do you make the colors darker? Well, let's say I've got green here, and right now I've got a little water added to my green, okay? Now if I wanna make that darker, don't add more water, add more paint. So instead I'm gonna soak up a little more green and add it. And the wetness of this paint continues to wet this green, and I keep adding green. So now when I test this, you'll see my green is very dark, okay? Now the opposite, if I want a lighter color, I'm gonna add more water to it. So I might take some green like this, and then just keep adding water to it. And now I'll test it, and I got a green that's much lighter, okay? So you're going to test your colors. So this is what you're going to do. We've got a color wheel right here. You've seen this before. I make a color wheel out of apples. And what I'm going to do is, there's an apple here that says red. This one you can't see. It says blue right here. And this right here says yellow. So what you're going to do is you're going to paint your apple in with those colors. So I'm going to just mix a red right now. And so I'm going to mix, I'll tell you what, let's mix a blue. Let's take blue instead. So I'm going to take my blue. I'll go right here so you can see it. Okay? And I'm going to mix up some blue right there and add a little water to it, and I'll test it. It's okay. All right? So what I'm going to do is now with my blue is I'm going to paint in the blue apple. So let's zoom in here a little bit. There we go. Now, here's my blue apple. So what I did is, once again, I tested. Now this is a practice sheet, so I don't care if you test it anywhere along the edge here. It doesn't really matter, okay? But in the blue, I want you to paint that color blue. So now, when you use your brush, you're going to use the tip of the brush, not the heel of the brush. So you're not going to do this. Here's a brush. Like, for example, here's my hand. This would be using the heel, pushing it against your hand like this, okay? This is using the tip. Got it? So I'm going to use the tip of the brush, not the heel. I'm going to take my blue here, and I'm going to, let's see if I can get that in the screen. There you go. There's my blue. I tested it out. I like it. So I'm going to take the tip, and I'm going to just fill this in rather quickly. And the other key with watercolors is you want to paint the whole area at one time. You don't want to stop halfway, let it dry, and then try to continue to paint it later, because you're going to get an edge forming. So I'm going to have a line in here. I'm going to go right in there. So I try to get this whole thing done at one time, like so. Now, watercolors, there's always going to be a little inconsistency. There's going to be some areas that are a little lighter and a little darker, and that's fine. That's just the nature of how it looks. A lot of times people like using watercolors for nature, because like, say you're doing a tree and you get inconsistency in the tree, that's great, because it happened accidentally. It looks more like nature. It's not so planned, okay? So let's say you were doing a tree. You might start with some green like this and have a texture like so, and then you'll let that dry. And then later you'll come in with a slightly different green, maybe like a yellow green, and you'll paint that in there, and you'll have little variations in that. And it looks really great for trees and bushes and things like that are more natural. So anyhow, what I'm going to have you do is this. I'm going to have you just start out by mixing, by painting in your blue and your red one, and then your yellow one. And then you're going to mix blue and yellow, and that's going to go here for your green. Okay? Now, just mixing blue and yellow, keep this in mind. Just like before with pastels, if you mix blue and yellow, yellow is a much darker color than blue. Now, see my yellow right now? It looks all contaminated. I'm going to get my brush a little bit wet. I'm going to get this wet, and I'm going to kind of soak the green off of there. So if I have a dry brush, I can kind of lift off that extra paint. Okay, because your brush kind of acts like a sponge. Like if you had a dry sponge, it would soak up that extra paint. So I'm going to go with some yellow here, and I'm going to go on my tray, and I'm going to mix some yellow. Now keep in mind, I like to have 2 jars. The reason I have 2 jars is sometimes this water gets pretty contaminated, and I don't feel like running back to the sink all the time. So I'll keep 2 jars, because yellow, since it's a lighter color, can get contaminated pretty quick. Like you could accidentally get some blue in there, and all of a sudden you got a green color instead. I'll test out my yellow. That looks pretty bright. Okay, now I want to make a green. And you might say, well, why are you mixing green when you can just grab it out of there? Just because I want you to experience how to mix colors. Okay, so you're going to mix to get your green. So I've taken my yellow, and if I'm going to add green to it, remember, green's a darker color. So it takes very small amount of green to make a difference in the yellow. So I'm just going to take a little bit of this green and just add it to there and mix it up. Oh wait, I was supposed to be mixing blue, wasn't I? Yeah. I just screwed up. All right, you got the idea though, okay? I don't want to mix yellow again. So you put yellow in there, you'll add a little blue to it till you get a green. Well, this is the difference. This is green, and in between yellow and green would be over here, where green be? Green would be here. In between yellow and green would be my lime green, so that's going to go right here. Oh, you're not even on this page there. You just saw it. There's my lime green there. So yellow's going to go here. And so I'm going to do my color wheel, just showing that I can control the colors and mix them properly. Got that? I'll be having another demonstration later, which shows you how to do more subtle value changes, okay? Let me show you some quick things really quick here. So I'll show you some things that students have done. Here's just some things I did. Well, I showed you this one, okay? So that was done in watercolors. Here is another one that I did in watercolors right here. Let me zoom out a little bit. So that was done with one color, just black. So it's black and water, and I worked on white paper, okay? This was done in green and black, and I worked on white paper. Now, here's some things that students have done. Here's a watercolor of a tiger, okay? So what they did is they laid colors down, and then they went back over the colors and started laying more details over the top, okay? Now, one other thing with watercolors, if you have two colors that are wet and you put them right next to each other, they're gonna bleed into each other. You know what I mean? So I'll just do that really quick. I'm gonna take a little green here, and if I take this lime green and put it right next to it, when they hit, they're gonna bleed into each other. Now, and sometimes you think that's okay, but a lot of times it's not. So if it's not, this is how we work in watercolors. If I wanted this to be blue, and let's say I wanted my background to be yellow, and I don't want those to bleed into each other, I'm gonna paint my blue, I'm gonna go to another part of my painting and paint that, and I'm not gonna come back over here until blue is dry. Then I can paint yellow next to it and it won't bleed into itself. Got that? So when we do watercolors, typically we move around a lot. We'll work on one area and work on another area. Then we'll go to another area and then we'll come back to that first area. So we do that a lot. Got that?